course, the whole thing about that wrestling is there's no actual fighting. It's all performative to create entertainment. That is what he's doing with all these summits. But at some point, shockingly, wrestling is not geopolitics, and the two will collide. I mean, I think the best outcome would actually be is if Ukraine could win this war, and the way to do that would be to allow the Senate's package of sanctions, which has been put forward by Lindsey Graham, the Republican senator, forward to really clamp down on Russia's economy. Europe to really...
Keir Starmer is one of 7 European leaders travelling to Washington today to support Volodymyr Zelensky in his meeting with Donald Trump. The US president has said it's up to Zelensky to end the war with Russia, but the Ukrainian leader wants to be sure of security guarantees for his country before agreeing to any deal. Speaking to Times Radio this morning, the government minister Stephen Kinnock said there can't be an agreement that stops Ukraine joining the EU or NATO.
The security guarantees that are being discussed are extremely important. Also very important that there's nothing around Ukraine having to reduce its military capability, and there's nothing around Ukraine having to be constrained in terms of its pathways to international partnerships such as the European Union and NATO.
Charlotte, as a European nation, we have a role, of course, in Ukraine. We have a stake in what happens in Ukraine, our safety and security, and it is very much, in the balance as well. But Keir Starmer being there today, is there anything he can usefully do? Is he there as a minder to make sure that Donald Trump doesn't duff up Zelensky again?
I think that's basically it, isn't it? I think it's an important symbolic move for all of these European leaders to be in place. Do I think they're going to change the outcome of the negotiations? Not really. And as well, it's probably helpful to have them sort of in the next room because, there are questions about whether there should be peacekeeping forces in Ukraine or whether, as the Germans have said, everyone's tied up trying to defend NATO's borders, so don't really have enough soldiers to spare. So I think it's probably quite helpful to have people nearby who you can turn to and say, look, could you enforce this? Could you enforce this ceasefire? What do you think of that? But no, the whole thing makes me a bit depressed, to be honest. I just think it seems very unlikely that something big is going to happen as a result of these negotiations. And if it does, it certainly won't have much to do with the UK.
Yeah, well, I mean, so this is what's strange about precisely where we are at the moment, Seb, because when Trump and Putin met last week in Alaska, there was huge fanfare, it was hugely heralded, and it seemed to end in sort of more or less nothing at all. And yet this week, people seem to have sort of picked that up as if we are in this position of extreme momentum. Something's about to happen, the ball's all rolling. It's quite hard to see why.
The answer is Donald Trump, because he's obviously the most powerful world leader, and he is giving it momentum by the focus he's giving to this, and the fact he's convening all these summits, which is the way he loves doing politics, the kind of Sun King model, where everyone comes to him, talks to him, gets the photo ops, and it makes him look as if he's in command. But what's so striking, Hugo, is that the kind of fundamentals of this hasn't changed. That if Vladimir Putin wants a ceasefire, he's always said that Russia has to control all of the Donbass region, it has to rule out EU and Ukraine membership for NATO, and those things are going to be very, very difficult for European leaders to swallow, because impossible for President Zelensky to swallow, because it would be the end of his career, but it would also likely mark the end of Ukraine, because if you hand over the Donbass region, which is on the eastern flank of Ukraine, about 2/3 of it's currently controlled by Russia, a third controlled by Ukraine. That is kind of a firewall between any further incursions into Ukraine. If you were to hand over all of the Donbass, which is what seems to be on the table in discussions in DC today, then the reality is that it would allow Russia to go away, rearm, and come back for part 2 of this further down the line. So President Zelensky has been right to say that has to stay where it is. I mean, the least worst outcome might be to kind of just leave the borderlines as they are at the moment, with some European forces to protect them. But then this comes to the problem of Europe's facing, which is this coalition of the willing, which Keir Starmer has pulled together. It's just simply not going to protect Ukraine, because President Zelensky has said you need about 200,000 troops to stop Russia from coming back and invading the rest of Ukraine. At the moment, the Coalition of the Willing has said 25,000 would be a stretch. 10,000 might be possible. And the fundamental question European leaders haven't really been able to answer is what happens if the little green men who we saw back in 2014 start popping up and start firing at NATO troops in the Donbass.
Well, quite, yeah.
And then at that stage, you're into a confrontation with Russia, if not kind of obviously, but in nature. And at that point, the whole thing gets very, very unstable.
Men in balaclavas as we were talking about them last time, I think it was. But the fact that we seem to be on on the edge of anything happening at all, Charlotte, is it just it's just the power of Donald Trump's will, the power of his rhetoric, that because he arranges the meetings, because the meetings are happening, because there was one meeting, because there's another meeting, he seems to feel he can just sort of power through the fundamental situation, which is Russia wants this land, Ukraine wants this land. There is no compromise between that.
Yes, and I sort of admire it, to be honest, because this seems like such an intractable problem, and Seb has really set out the intractable nature of this and how challenging it is. But Donald Trump sort of doesn't view the world the same way the rest of us view the world, where we're all kind of looking at the structures and the problems and going, well, the rules look like that, and if you do that, this person will do this. He sort of just wants to steamroller through and make his deals, and sometimes that does work. Sometimes that has, in the case of the Abraham Accords, for example, actually changed things. And you think, okay, well, why not? Why not have someone who is vaguely disruptive to all of these things? He's got closer than anyone else has.
Well, but has he though? Well, has he got close at all? Has he got anywhere at all?
Well,
he says he's got closer. There are the meetings happening, but there's no. This is the thing. You're poised for. He creates this situation where you're constantly poised for everything you've always believed to be wrong, right? So like last week there was all this talk about the model could be the West Bank, as if the West Bank wasn't one of the most disastrous geopolitical regions in the world. Whereas actually now all of a sudden you're going, well, hang on, if they can only have peace if there's some situation where Ukraine sort of de facto gives up territory, but can't legally give up territory because they don't have the power to do so. Maybe that sort of does make sense, and maybe they create this sort of different reality, but it never quite comes to actual reality.
But I think we are going to hit, Charlotte's right, we are going to hit this actual reality at some point. That Donald Trump's favourite thing is wrestling, right? That's his kind of model for politics.
Not personally.
Not personally, but WWE, WWF, whichever one it is.
Yeah.
I don't know, lovely stuff. Mm-hmm. But that's the way he views it. And of course, the whole thing about that wrestling is there's no actual fighting. It's all performative to create entertainment. That is what he's doing with all these summits. But at some point, shockingly, wrestling is not geopolitics, and the two will collide. I think the best outcome would actually be is if Ukraine could win this war, and the way to do that would be to allow the Senate's package of sanctions, which has been put forward by Lindsey Graham, the Republican senator, forward to really clamp down Russia's economy, Europe to really ramp up the weapons, and then in about 18 months' time, in that situation, it's totally plausible Ukraine could repel the Russian forces and win this. But Donald Trump's not willing to do that. He's too impatient. He wants to get a deal now, and he wants to get this thing done just to say, look, I did this. I got this over the line. No one else did. Aren't I the greatest?
He wants the prize, and he wants to stop spending money. Speaking to Mark Urban on this show earlier today, and I would advise people to listen back. Mark was suggesting, as he wrote in his Sunday Times column, that actually things could be about militarily. Things could be on the verge of going quite badly for Ukraine. So there is sort of some sort of great impetus there for them to sort of make some kind of deal. But just even now we find ourselves slipping into Trumpish language. You go make a deal as if that's an answer. What deal? What does it mean? Why would anyone say yes to it?